Disclaimer. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, etc. This video is a critique/commentary, which is considered fair use as stated above. I do not own any of the footage used in this video, so you have been warned. Apostasy is owned by Megosh, Outer Loops Records, and Cooking Vinyl America. Now let's get into the video. Hello everyone, this is Justin from Subvoid Media and I'm here with another rockin' album review. The album in question today is the newest LP released by the progressive rock band Megosh, straight out of Baltimore. The album we will be reviewing is called Apostasy and was released last year in 2016. It's kinda weird calling 2016 last year, right? But without further ado, let's get right into this review. That rhymed. Well, let's dive right in with my comments on the instruments and their sound specifically. Well, first off, the mixture of a metalcore open note riff style, plus the harmonics added on top and laced in between, adds a very unique sound to the songs that are in this album. And I think that really does good by the band. Another thing, speaking of mixtures of sounds, the mixture of electronic sounds and then the solid guitar solos really make the flow of each song phenomenal, and I think it really helps, solidify the song as one solid instrument, as my friend Mason, the co-owner of this channel, would call it. Another thing about the instrumentals is the complexity, and the instrumental parts of the songs add a personal twist which sets Megosh apart from other bands in the genre, which usually have very simplistic instrumentals, or they sound very intense and complex when in reality it's like open note, open note, open note, open note really fast with every instrument playing the same riff. But I'm not going to go on a side rant about that. The instrumental interlude in the middle of the album really gives the listener a break and makes the album feel more like a play with two acts and structure rather than just a conglomerate of songs. However, I had to nitpick to find a negative, but there is a large emphasis on the harmonics and this complex sound with very minimal of these open hand riffs and things like that. And like I said, it sets Megosh apart from other progressive rock/math rock bands, but this may turn away the math rock oriented fans of the genre, like Dance Gavin Dance fans, because they want to hear things that sound similar to the other bands in the genre, and it kind of throws them for a loop, and they're like, nah, I don't really like that. But overall, I think the complexity and the structure of the instrumental portions of the songs, as well as just the instruments themselves behind the vocals, really adds a personal flavor to this album, which, in other words, makes the listener sit there and say, I've heard that song somewhere. That is Megosh. It's insert song name here off of Apostasy. And I can tell just by the sound that it's this song. Whereas a lot of bands out there nowadays, they all sound the same. You'll be like, is that Pierce the Veil or is that freaking Black Veil Brides? Just kidding. I know there's the obvious difference between the two bands. I'm just trying to make a point here that Megosh has a very personalized and unique sound that is portrayed through their instrumentals as well as the vocals, but we'll get onto that in the last section of this review. Speaking of that, now we're going to start talking about the overall composition as the songs as a whole, including lyrics. So I got a few points about that. Alrighty, so my first point for the overall composition of the songs, with lyrics and instruments included, is that the lyrics themselves are a lot more complex, not necessarily repetitive and droning on, but they tell an interesting story within each song, showing that the artist put real time and effort into writing these songs. Unlike some artists. Oh no. However, a darker, more poetic style of writing used in the lyrics is definitely a good distraction from the upbeat, poppy sounds of more recent musical talents who have sold out, or just simply that's what they've their foundation is. The change in tempo in certain parts of the songs definitely keeps the listener interested. What I mean by that is that in the beginning of a song it may be slow, and then fast, and then slow, and then medium speed, and then fast, and it jumps around. And I really think that keeps the listener interested and kind of keeps them in tune because of the constant changes. It's not just, oh, the song's the same thing over and over and over, I'm going to skip to the next one. It's not like that. With that being said, the songs flow really well, actually, with the constantly changing tempo. If it really flows well with the majority of the instruments playing in unison. It sounds like the instruments, it's one big instrument just playing this massive, amazing sound that everyone can get hooked on, and not like a jumble of instruments kind of doing their own thing that just sounds like noise, which is something that is on the rise right now, which it shouldn't be. Another band that does the whole everything sounds like one instrument and really amazing is Metallica. The singing style used by the vocalist adds a lot of variety in the range. He hits high notes, he goes kind of low, stays in his middle ground, his comfortable zone where he sings really well. He adds a lot of twists, especially when he's dragging out words. He'll kind of throw a twist or something in there. And that makes the songs sound a lot less like they're just droning on and on with one constant tone. For example, my friend showed me a Pierce the Veil song he really likes. And don't get me wrong, Pierce the Veil, they're all talented guys, but the singer was singing in just one constant tone throughout the entire song. And I got bored of it. I was like, I'm waiting for a change. I'm waiting for something different. But it never showed. So that's one thing that I really have to give these guys props for, is changing up the vocal style. Another thing that I really like is there is a defined message embedded into the story within each song, which gives purpose to listening to the song the whole way through, as well as giving, the album a purpose for listening the whole way through, because it's a story. Various different songs have much different sounds to them, both in lyrical content and instruments, and the electronic effects and this and that. So the album doesn't sound like one big song. Now, what I mean by that is if you were to just take all the songs and mash them together, it wouldn't sound like one continuous song, because there's a lot of variety in how the songs are written, how they're performed, the sounds, everything about them has a lot of variety, so you cannot put them all together and say it's one big song, because then it wouldn't make sense. Which a lot of bands out there nowadays, like the aforementioned band that I put a picture of, if you were to put all their songs together, it sounds like one giant song, which I think is just lazy songwriting. It's using a formula. Whereas these guys put a lot of time and effort into writing these songs, and so they all sound different, obviously showing that they wrote them with different intentions, which I give them mad props for doing that. What else? The mix of genres being used in the creation of these songs, it's really good. Like, some songs have a folky sound in the beginning, then they turn into a more rock sound, a more upbeat Panic at the Disco sound in one of the songs. Like, they take a lot of inspiration from a lot of different bands, which is actually going to be my next point. Like I said, they take a lot of inspiration from bands like Classic, Fall Out Boy, Green Day, and Panic at the Disco, but they add their own personal twist to make it their own, which is a refreshing change from the blatant copying of other artists commonly seen in smaller time bands trying to make it big. Because, how else do you get big besides blatantly copying something that made someone else big? Duh. All joking aside, though, they definitely did take a lot of inspiration. I'm not saying that everything is just 100% theirs, no one's used it before. Because in music, that's impossible. Everything's been used at least once. So I really give them props for that as well. One thing that may not bother a lot of people, but I really like, is that the titles of the songs are a phrase or a word that sum up the story behind the song. Most progressive rock bands or math rock bands, whichever one, they both do it. They have random nonsense titles that don't necessarily correlate to the contents of the song, which, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it sets bands that do make meaningful titles apart from those who don't. Which the majority of bands nowadays, they have like these random titles that don't correlate to the song just because it's like clickbait almost. Like, that might be a stretch to say, but it's kind of like clickbait. Like, if it's got a really weird title, you're like, oh, this song's going to be really funny if I listen to it, and it has nothing to do with the title. But all the songs on this album, the title correlates either to the message, to the story, or just to the main point, the main idea of the song, which is something I give them props for as well, because not a lot of bands in their genre are doing that. In terms of bad things, I don't really have a lot of bad things to say about the compositions of the songs, simply because, I really had to nitpick to pull a lot of bad things out, but no review is a review if it's only positives. Well, I guess one thing I could say is because of the constant change in tempos that I mentioned, some listeners who prefer an easy listening, you just get this one sound, you become accustomed to it, you're able to find your footing within the song, and you're able to, find your zone. These people get kind of thrown off by the constant changing of tempos and sounds within these songs, and that might kind of turn them away from this album because they're not able to just listen to a song and be able to get enthralled in the sound they hear initially. They have to readjust to the different sounds. Like I said, I have to nitpick. I know that's some deep shit, but that's one thing that, there are people out there who are like that, who prefer just one constant sound within a song so they can just get completely engulfed in the song and just feel it flow through their veins. Which, that's not bad at all. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying if you do that, you don't listen to music, right? I'm just saying that people like that probably wouldn't appreciate this album as much as high-energy people who don't mind the constant change in sounds, the readjusting. I like to readjust, but don't get me wrong. Sometimes I'm in the mood where I kind of just want to listen to a song and get completely engulfed in it, listen to that one sound, that one tone, that one tempo, and just kind of, mosey my way through that song, as you could say. But that's pretty much the last of what I have to say about the overall composition of the songs. The second to last, next topic I'm going to go over is talking about the album as a whole and some key parts of specific songs that really stuck out to me. So let's do that. Why don't we? Yeah, let's do that. Alrighty, so my first point about the album as a whole, or specific song parts, is the song Carrying Fire has a folk-sounding intro with a lot of harmonics. Then it shifts it suddenly into a tone of rock and roll, which is interesting, and it is really executed smoothly, and I really enjoyed it. Another thing is there's a heavy use of imagery in these songs, in the lyrics, that create a very detailed image for the listener to imagine as they progress through the song, which has a story, so you can visualize it, which is something I absolutely love in music, and a lot of bands don't do nowadays, but Megosh does it very well. Each song has its own unique sound, which I said earlier reinforces the fact that the album doesn't feel like one big song. It feels like a bunch of individual, well-written, very detailed songs, which is something that I absolutely love, and I give them props for once again. The back and forth conversation sound in the beginning of Ask Your Mother is a unique writing style not commonly seen in progressive rock, and when it is used, it's usually poorly executed. However, this song does it right, and it does it very right. Like I mentioned with individual songs, the variety in sound and the embedded images and stories and messages help make the album as a whole its own experience, kind of like a roller coaster. And that is something that I definitely love in albums, is whenever I feel like I'm going on this emotional roller coaster as I learn these stories and messages and, find my way through the tracks, along the trail, and eventually at the end. It's something I really appreciate, and this album does it well. So if you want to be on an adventure when listening to an album, then listen to this album. The only downside I can really pull is that this album doesn't have one continuous story arc. It's more like an anthology of short stories, with each song having its own story that doesn't tie together into a much longer story, which may turn people away who are looking for one continuous long story, kind of like The Wall by Pink Floyd. That's one long continuous story throughout the album, which if you're looking for that, unfortunately you're not looking in the right place if you're looking here. But if you just want to listen to a few short stories with fancy tunes that sound real nice, then go ahead and give this album a listen. That's pretty much all that I have to say about the album as a whole, or specific songs. And now we're going to move on to the verdict. This is the good part, the part that everyone's waiting for. So let's do that. Alrighty, I would give Apostasy by Megosh an 8.5 out of 10. I found that I was nitpicking when trying to pull negatives out of each of the categories I described in this review. And that the only thing keeping this album from a 9, like I said, is that very last negative point about it not being one continuous story arc. That would have definitely solidified a 9 for me, most definitely. And what kept it from a 10? Well, that, and there's a few other small things I nitpicked at the end of each category. But, you can't please everyone. This album probably could have gotten a pretty decent 10. But I decided to give it an 8.5 because I felt that was a really fair dealing, especially with that one final thing I had said. Anyhow, regardless of my opinions towards this album, I would definitely recommend giving Megosh a try. I found them by randomly clicking a video in the recommended tab on YouTube, and I don't regret it one bit. I absolutely love Apostasy and Bodyworks, which is an album that I do not review in this video, obviously, or it would be called Bodyworks Album Review. If you're more of a math rock or metalcore fan, I have faith that you'd still find enjoyment in listening to Megosh, because they have a few elements from each of those two genres that are kind of placed strategically into some of their songs. Well, anyhow, that sums up my review. If you guys enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Comment, oh me gosh, just like you see on the screen if you made it to the end, so I know that you made it to the end. And I will see you guys in the next video. Later.